Now I am pleased to be joined by a remarkable group of creative minds. Flutist Tim Munro is a renowned champion of contemporary music. Composers Amy Beth Kirsten and Eve Beglarian are bold and original voices in contemporary American music. Tim is joining us from Chicago, Eve is joining us from Vermont, and AB is joining us from Oberlin, Ohio. Welcome to all of you. So glad you're here.
Thanks, Daniel.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here, for sure.
Great, yeah. To start us off, Tim, why don't you give us a quick overview of your set today?
So I found this time incredibly challenging. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or who I am at the moment. It's very strange. And I've been looking for solid ground. And where I'm finding solid ground is in the voices that for me are speaking from like their heart to my heart. And so there's so many people that encompasses, but I really wanted for this set to bring to an audience during this time composers who are just like themselves and vulnerable and speak from their heart to other hearts. So I'm playing Amy Beth's Pirouette on a Moon Sliver, just the first movement, partially because that piece is the weirdest piece I've ever played that communicates to every audience member. I don't think I've ever had somebody not have a great, intense reaction to that piece. And Eve's I Will Not Be Sad in This World, because all I'm listening to at the moment, I think, is vocal consort music. And Eve's piece allows me to sort of be part of a choir of voices at a time when just like that is really speaking to my heart. Beautiful.
So you will start your set with AB's piece, Pirouette. So turning now to you, AB, your piece riffs a little on the stock character of Harlequin. Maybe you can tell us about that character and how he inspired your piece.
Well, sure. So Pirouette on a Moon Sliver is as a study piece, actually, for a larger work called Columbine's Paradise Theater that I wrote for Ape Blackbird. And when I was kind of exploring these characters, it was right around the time that Tim and I met and really kind of had this wonderful musical synergy. And I just knew I wanted to write something for him that was sort of that would expand upon, what I had seen him do already, and sort of like, and also push me to a new level of exploring the flute and exploring this theatrical character. Harlequin is kind of a trickster, and when I was researching this character, I just was having nightmares about this evil Harlequin, and so I decided I sort of just had to go with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if the two of you could talk a little bit about your process of collaboration as you evolved this work, sort of, especially about the very striking incorporation of theatrics and other kinds of vocalizations that are not, standard in flute literature.
Sure. Well, I mean, we started off by like I wrote like a little like sketchy material, and then I came to Chicago at a certain point from somewhere. I don't remember where I was living at the time, but you just played through some things and we tried some other things, and it was a a jumping off point for the piece. I don't know.
Yeah, well, so my memory, because this is going back almost 10 years now,
yeah.
And you were in New Haven.
That's
I remember
right.
going to New Haven for a day, and I very specifically remember going through an entire you had this giant list of different vocal sounds to test whether I could play notes at the same time, whether I could play notes before or after, how quickly I could switch. And then you had a sketch, and what I remember is very vividly at the end of that day, because we had done all this work and it was kind of an abstraction to me. It felt like I felt like kind of far from the piece, but you played me your own recording of that section of the piece. And that just like brought it home. And I think that's something that's really unique about the piece, is that your voice is actually present in it, in the sense that you could sing the whole of the piece, and you did. You kind of like made it. The flute was part of your voice, and I just felt like an extension of your voice in a really fun way.
That's cool. I completely forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot about you coming to New Haven. That's right. But yeah, I mean, I also think about the fact that when you got the final score, you also got an audio file, you know. And I shudder to think, like, well, I have since lost that audio file. I have no idea.
I wish I am not sure. I looked for it a couple of years ago, actually, because a flute player was wondering about the sort of how to shape these things. And I was like, because that was so important to me, your vocal track.
Wow.
That's a bit of archival history that some music historian will stumble upon years hence and treasure it.
I do remember changing a few things because I was like, oh, Amy Beth means this. And actually, I remember playing it for you, and you're like, "Oh, that's completely different to actually what I specifically was imagining." But you went with me.
Yo, totally.
Because
yeah.
me making it my own, and it being like through my own kind of body and through my own expression was, and I loved that about working with you.
Well, the feeling's mutual. You know, they say smart people surround themselves with people who are smarter and better than they are. So, you know, it's, you know, and it's true. I mean, this piece is really, I mean, I feel like, I mean, I don't know, taking credit for this piece is hard for me because it's so much about how you perform it, you know, and it's just, you've really made it your own over the last decade. So, it is yours.
I'll just finish and say that I'm also chuffed that it has been performed now by, I mean, a bunch of other flute players. And so the piece is being created anew every time it's being done. But I'm so glad that it's getting out there.
Yeah, that's cool.
It sounds like such a happy collaboration. It seems like it was such a good match of sensibilities between the two of you. So that's delightful. It's a wonderful thing to witness. Turning now to your piece, Eve. As I was learning about this beautiful work, I was fascinated to read that your piece transforms a song by an Armenian singer-songwriter. And I wondered if you could tell us a little about that source material, what it means to you, and how it came to be part of this piece.
I love that you call Sayat Nova a singer-songwriter, which is actually technically completely right, but he's like an 18th century guy. And so we don't usually apply that term to an 18th century singer-songwriter, but that's definitely what he is. And part of, I think, what draws me to him in particular is that he was born in Tbilisi, which was a very cosmopolitan place in the 18th century. You had Azeris and Turks and Armenians and Georgians all sort of living together and interacting together, and lots of language macaronic stuff going on. And so it's like the apotheosis of a kind of cosmopolitan way of living that in fact ended up being destroyed. He was killed for not embracing Islam at some point when there were pogroms going on or whatever. So there's the upside of cosmopolitanism, which I think we've all taken for granted as a positive thing. And then there's the downside when two sides decide to demonize each other. So the idea that the piece is called "I Will Not Be Sad in This World" is coming from a place of fully understanding how hard it can be not to be sad in this world.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a heaviness to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's so beautifully said, because this world implies something unutterably beautiful at the same time as being full of sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the genesis of the piece was a commission from Maria Martin, who was commissioning 8 composers, from a range of stylistic and whatever, and mine was, I believe, the only one with electronics. She specifically wanted electronics, and I was actually doing a residency in Italy at the time, at Civitella Ranieri, and I was in an old tobacco barn that had been converted into a studio. So it had windows. It was like maybe 3 stories tall, and it had windows going all the way up. In fact, there weren't windows on the ground part of it. Like the first story had no windows. So everything was a clerestory window. So the light came in always refracted, but with this dazzling brightness because it was up high. And when you went outside, you were in like an olive grove. It was stunning. It was the most stunning place. And so writing this piece, which really meant improvising the tape part, which is all made out of my voice, was one of these blissful afternoons. I'll never forget it, where I just was like, oh, this is what I should do, is a version of this piece. And so I got out the microphone and started singing and making the tape part, just like with no forethought. It just flowed right out.
Wow.
And it was really fun. And so for me, the piece contains that in a certain way, that piece came with no struggle, with no angst. It was like composer heaven, where you've had lunch, you're not hungry, you're not cranky, all your needs are met, you're in this beautiful place, and the piece just shows up, Like, how many times in my life has it ever felt that way? I don't know. Not many. So
yet another kind of idyllic image here of like this very, very happy circumstances, and that leaves its imprint on the piece. Even sonically, so I suppose then the acoustic we're hearing in the electronics track is the acoustic of that big tobacco barn.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, plus processing. And
Right.
I should say, taking it further, that working with Tim was a similar sort of experience. I mean, it was decided somehow that, Tim, you were going to play the piece. And he brought it to me like the afternoon before the performance. And it was like bliss. It was just total bliss. I don't know. I just felt like you totally found a way into the piece in this totally happy making way. And there was nothing to discuss. Did we even have a conversation about, it was just like, yeah, go for it. So
I think that's one of his superpowers, is that, because I had the same kind of experience. It was like, the first time Tim played my music was a chamber piece, and he totally got it, like without any explanation. And the way that, like, watching that rehearsal process, I felt like, I feel like I got another degree, watching him, other people, how to play my music. And we had only just met, and it was not an easy piece. So it was like, there's something special going on.
That's very sweet. I mean, I do feel like, for me personally, that when composers' voices speak to me, it's very easy for me to understand where you're really coming from. And Eve, your piece, you describing the composition of the piece really resonates with me, because it makes me realize that I'm so often in two minds when I play a piece. I'm sort of in the moment, but then I'm mostly thinking about either things that are coming before or after, what I'm doing technically, what I'm trying to communicate, and I just feel so present in your piece. And so I love hearing that is sort of built into the way that the piece, because I just feel like I'm in this radiant, beautiful, I get like emotional thinking about it, because it's like so wonderful to live in that space. And again, that's like one of the reasons I wanted to put it on this little concertlet.
Yeah. Well, I'm thrilled. Yeah. I'm actually curious, because you were talking about having worked with Amy Beth's demo of the piece, of her piece. I have a demo of my piece where I'm singing the flute part, which I actually left on the internet for people to listen to who don't have a sense of how to shape the piece. And I'm curious if you even heard that or not.
No, I didn't. I don't know if I saw that it existed. I think I would have for sure listened to it. I felt like a consort singer with your consort of voices.
Yes.
But I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, actually. There aren't too many pieces that can have that sort of kind of background assistance context or whatever. Like your piece works super well, Eve, because the range of the alto flute part is pretty limited. And I love that about it, because it's actually everyone's favorite part of the alto flute.
Right. Right.
It's such a silky sound.
So silky.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Tim, I don't know if you want to spoil any surprises, but did you want to say anything about how you decided to present these works today?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I'm recording them in my condo, which is like an 800 square foot condo in Chicago. It's a little guy. We have you might even be able to hear in the background, my wife is putting our 5.5-month-old to sleep. So like, this is also what I'm experiencing in this time. And it was important for me to acknowledge that in kind of like making recordings of these pieces for this moment. So I won't spoil the surprise for Amy Beth's piece, but I will say that the piece works best when there's an audience. And so I wanted to make sure that that was the case. And for Eve's piece, I'm actually going to shoot it tonight, because I wanted it to be at nighttime. And we're just like, my wife and I are going to string up some lights and we'll see what happens. I love acknowledging, though, that not trying to pretend that this is a concert hall and that this is going to be like the ideal like classical vision of whatever, but really like embracing this situation for all of its, unexpected joys, actually.
Absolutely. And but before we go, I'm curious if any of you would like to share how you've been spending this time, this social isolation, and if it's impacted your creative work, or if it's been a creative blossoming, or if it's been difficult to work, or how you're all feeling.
I feel like it's I've been here in Oberlin since January, and it's kind of been a spiritual blossoming more than anything, because I found that the only way that I can deal with the horrifying news is to turn inward. And so I've just been trying to deepen my meditation practice, and that what goes along with that is walking between 5 and 8 miles every day in the morning at 5 a.m. And what I've really been focused on is just trying to make sure that I'm well so that I can be there for my students who are struggling, some of them a lot, and my friends in Italy who are really struggling. And so I want to be somebody that people can lean on in this time, because I'm I feel solid now that I'm walking so much, and meditating so much that so that's kind of been my focus. But the creative stuff it is what it is. I do a little bit every day. I try to, but it's not. There's no sense of cohesion really, and I'm just kind of letting that be for now.
I mean, I'm terrified. I spend most days terrified. I'm finding it difficult. I will say that having a 5.5-month-old is actually helpful in a certain way, and just like I have a daily task. And I am not fine. I have lots of ideas, and then just no particular feeling of drive to create at a moment when it just feels like I don't know what the way that people will create and receive creations and experience things. And yeah, it's I listen to Monteverdi. I started learning the Baroque flute. I'm reading a piece of historical fiction that's like about Henry VIII's right-hand man. I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of like escaping the modern world. I feel like that is like a happy place. That doesn't help anybody necessarily. I mean, like Amy Beth, I'm also finding real joy in whenever I can offer like mentorship or just like tiny little bits of assistance in whatever ways I can.
Yeah, for me, the strangeness of this has been that I'm accustomed to a good amount of solitude when I'm here in Vermont, because I sort of set up this life here in Vermont in contradistinction to my life in New York. And it happened that I was up here when everything got canceled, so there was no reason to go back to New York. But it feels entirely different from voluntary solitude, right? It's a whole completely different thing. Yeah. And so I really have taken it slow, not putting any demands on myself, because with everything canceled, like there are no real deadlines, right? I mean, even for projects that were in the middle of happening, they are no longer in the middle of happening. So there's no rush, And I think it's actually my job as an artist to sort of pay attention to where we are rather than impose something on this time, right? Like my job is to take it in and not worry about making sense of it until it wants to be made sense of somehow. So I got lucky. I sort of by chance found there's a poet named Ariana Rines who did what she refuses to call a class. It was more like a book club for nerdy artists.
Wonderful. That sounds perfect.
It was awesome. And we read the Duino elegies of Rilke together over 10 days between the new moon and the full moon last time, which was of course perfect because he wrote them in a castle in isolation right after the war, the First World War. So like that was all like perfect. And now this new moon, we just started reading Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth. It's like Sumerian poetry that is beyond the beyond. I didn't like the Rilke I know by heart. This Sumerian poetry I knew nothing about. So and it is an awesome experience to be with this, because what I notice is it's easy to remain in contact with the people that we're closest to. We have rituals for connecting with our closest people. What we don't have is ways of connecting with people we don't already know, right? And that's what urban life is good for, is that we can connect with people we don't already know because we're into the same weird experimental theater, or we're at the same odd new music concert or whatever. And so those loose ties, which is what makes life feel rich and full of potential, need some way of being replicated. And for me, joining this class where I didn't know any of the people, including Ariana, we'd never met in person, has been really transformative, because those loose ties, it's a celebration of loose ties.
Yeah, you don't realize how nourishing and necessary those loose ties are until they're no longer there. Yeah, and that's what this period has brought home to me as well. So it's so amazing to speak with the three of you. You're all such deep thinkers and have so much to say, and this has been a great conversation. I thank you all very, very much for your time.
Totally a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. And now it's time to turn it over to Tim and enjoy Tim's wonderful performances.
Can't wait.
Yes.